Hello, we are the Asian Narrative Project, or ANP for short. First of all, thank you so much to BaylenFM and their project, or their current project, the digital festival House Arrest, that passes the mic to community leaders and communities of Asian heritage across the globe. We are especially thankful that they allowed us to pre-record because of time difference. In this episode, we'll be talking about the background of our project, how it started, where it came from, and what we have found in this journey and more. So please stay tuned. My name is Satoko and I am Japanese, but I was born in Switzerland and I was brought up in Holland, and I had a British education. So, like many other stories, it's kind of similar that there's a clash of identity of my Asian heritage and my Western upbringing. And so that is kind of where the Asian Narrative Project started, as a means to kind of communicate and talk to more people like me, basically, because I found that my story was definitely not unique to me. And so I gathered, or I collected, or I kind of reached out to my two best friends on the two opposite sides of the earth, Lynn and Asaki, and I will pass the mic to them now.
Okay, so I'm Lynn. I'm Vietnamese. My parents immigrated to the UK, so we're stationed in London. Most of my education is in the UK. And I met Satoko actually at university, not in London, just somewhere in a far Midlands. And yeah, she came across this project. She just texted me in the middle of the night because of obviously the time difference, saying I've got something to talk to you about. I'm like, okay, it's 5 a.m. Let's just. But yeah, she like we just kind of brainstormed some things, and she says she's got another friend interested, and now we're here. So again, similar to Satoko as well, like upbringing in the Western societies, with clashing with the Eastern societies, was very difficult to kind of navigate, which is kind of one of the main reasons why we started AMP, is just to kind of help the youth kind of navigate their lives, or just to not feel alone, essentially. So yeah, that's pretty much me, and I'm going to pass this over to Asaki.
I'm Masaki. I'm Japanese American. I was born in America, but lived both in Japan and America. I've been going back and forth throughout my life. And I think as of now, I've lived in America a little bit more than Japan. But yeah, I went to school in Japan because I just thought, I've got most of my education up until then in America. And I thought, what better way to, go back to Japan and have that experience that I never had. So that's where I met Satoko, also in university.
It's a complicated story. We'll get into it
later. Yeah. And then I think was it last year? Like end of last year, I think Satoko came up to me, also texted me and said, brought up this idea of starting this Instagram account. But I thought it was very natural because we already kind of talked about these kind of issues already when we were hanging out as like friends and just, throughout college. So it wasn't anything new. It was just like putting all the information on all the conversations that we already have out there for other people to see and hear and listen to all these experiences, as well as just like within our friend group. So I thought it was a really good idea. But yeah, I've been having so much fun with these girls so far. And it's such a great way to like just hang out with them because we have weekly meetings and we can like just talk to each other all the time and just have our little rant sessions every weekend.
Yeah. It's like therapy, pretty much.
It is basic. I mean, it is kind of therapy in a way.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about these issues that I think we had like cooped up in us for so long, just being like being brought up in a different culture to your own heritage. I think we've always carried that around with us, but we just didn't really either we were too young, or we weren't mature enough, or we didn't know how to kind of talk about it, and now we do, and now we also have the means to, and it's like trying to create that safe space so that other people can share their stories as well. And the more people share their stories, I think the more just it becomes more naturalized, and people, and I think we'll get into it a little bit more as well, I think, later, but the purpose of ANP isn't just for Asians, it's also a place for non-Asians and people from other cultures to kind of listen in and or read our posts and kind of learn about what we experience and what we would like to see from, and things like that. So it works both ways, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, we can start about like why we started this and like how we kind of came together as well. I know we kind of touched on it briefly. It's pretty much Satoko kind of gathering the troops, just like assembled the Avengers, but as a three. But yeah, I think the common thing between us, and I think with like not just Asian communities, but it was more of just not having that space to really talk about Asian or just immigrant issues kind of around like living in a Western society. It was just not really understanding if you belong to one or two groups, or just it was just very difficult. And like Asaki said, like we have these conversations between us, and I've realized once we've actually gathered together, the conversation is growing, like even in my own friendship groups of non-Asians, and even my Asian friends that never really spoke about these issues with me, but now are being able to like vocalize themselves. And I know like one of the most amazing things, like the feedback that we've gotten was we've encouraged them to kind of speak out as well. So I know one of the issues that we spoke about was with the whole Stop Asian Hate hashtag that kind of came about with the whole COVID-19 situation. I think Asians stereotype is being very, very quiet, very just resilient to any type of uncomfortable conversations or confrontations. So it was really nice to, finally hear Asian people that usually am quiet, or, very just, I'll just keep it to myself, etc. I don't want to cause an issue. Them being actually loud and, having that conversation even in their workplaces. And, they said to me they wouldn't be able to do that without, hearing our confidence in, talking about these type of issues. And I think that's one of the most amazing things that I've heard and felt with ANP. But yeah, what about you guys actually? What's the most amazing things about ANP for you guys?
I feel like ever since we started, there's so many questions that we ask ourselves and each other that we've never asked anybody before. So it's kind of like opening up a Pandora box, and just like, that's why I say that. That's why we say it's like a therapy session, because I'm like, I didn't even know that I had these kind of issues that was, in the back of my head. And it's just so nice to have that kind of, what's the word?
Output?
Yeah, output with the people who's also experiencing the same thing. So then I don't feel like I'm alone. It's like, oh, it's something that everybody else is experiencing, and it's nice to have like somebody along with me while I discover myself as well.
Yeah, I think I had this idea for a while, and I think I told you this as well in like my message, or like my text messages when I reached out to you, but it's not the same if you do it yourself. I whether it's not just maybe it is the Asian stereotype, but it's also just like you alone is a little bit daunting. But so I reached out to you guys. I think for me it's kind of a similar mix of both. I think the best thing for me about this is, first of all, it's only really in the recent couple years that I kind of recognized and also fully accepted my Asian heritage, because I grew up in an environment where I in many occasions I would be the only Asian in my whole year, like East Asian in my whole year. So I was brought up in an environment where really there was no one else who looked like me, and so I started to kind of feel estranged from my own identity, and I started to see myself as not Asian. And so it's really when I'm now in Japan, and I came back to Japan and I made Japanese friends, but also like friends with similar background as me, and I realized, okay, so there are other people like me who look Asian but can speak English or have been brought up elsewhere. And then I was like, okay, maybe it is possible to be Asian then. So maybe I am Asian. And just kind of realizing and becoming a lot more comfortable in my own skin about like my identity, and that it's not just me who has these like culture clashes. So it's really within the past couple years that I fully kind of accepted it, and then now I can talk about it. And I think one really nice thing about ANP is that it allows for me to kind of talk through ANP to my old friends, like my school friends as well, who, you know, so I get messages from non-Asian friends saying like, oh, I didn't know that that was what you were experiencing, or it's really nice to hear about those stories. What can we do to help? What can, you know, we do to make sure that Asians, and also just any, you know, ethnic minority or POC or however you want to call it, like groups, feel safe. And I think it's really nice because I think all three of us are getting different kinds of positive feedback from our own friendship groups, and then we put that together and it kind of grew. So I think that's, for me, the most like really heartwarming, like really nice thing.
Yeah, agreed. It's been quite positive so far, I think. I can't see any really negative connotations to what we're doing at the moment.
It's just we gotta good, listen back to our own voice. I don't think I can get used to listening to my own voice.
Yeah,
that's the one thing.
Do you know what? 'Cause obviously I edit the podcast, so I'm like, I hate the way I sound. But after like, you know, 100 times hearing my own voice, I'm like, it's just, I can't.
You also hear like your, I don't know what it is. It's just like your habits, like your speaking habits, and you're like, how many times do you say this word, or like?
So yeah, I think it'll be quite good to talk about how, you know, we have this Eastern culture and living, you know, growing up in this culture with our parents and families, but then also, you know, growing up in this society where we live in, where it's the complete opposite, where it's like Western culture, Western ways of doing things. And I know for me it was quite difficult because my parents, like still to this day, don't really speak that much English. I know language is quite a difficult thing for me. You know, I kind of grew up kind of resentful that my parents didn't understand English, and it was just like really annoying, and I had to translate everything, had to take them to, you know, their appointments, and I like as a young person I had to deal with such very complex English worded documents, to the point where like even now I'm like, okay, it's fine, like I've gone over it, you know, I've like really come to terms with, you know, their sacrifice of coming into this country, you know, not literally knowing what they were doing, not knowing the language and etc. And I can't even process like at this age to do what they did, like at all. Like learning a language now, it's not gonna happen for me. Like I learned Chinese for 2 years, it's gone. I don't remember anything. It's pointless. So I know language for me was a very difficult thing. But I'm still fluent in Vietnamese now, which I do appreciate, because I think knowing Vietnamese is a big thing in my culture and just my identity as a Vietnamese, like British woman, and being able to obviously communicate with my parents and my family back at home. But yeah, how important do you think, like, you know, language, or if there's any, you know, what difficult things did you kind of grow up with, you know, being both basically Eastern and Western?
I feel like growing up, I never saw them as difficulties. I just saw them as like what I did. And now that we're doing AMP and now that I'm hearing all these everybody else's stories and watching, you know, Asian representations and TV shows, I'm realizing that those experiences that I had are because I'm Asian. And like, I never realized that they were maybe some difficulties that I went through, you know? Like, now that I'm seeing it, I'm like, I did feel discriminated. I did feel, you know, kind of uncomfortable with these things, but I just didn't really realize them when I was going through them. Like, I would feel so weird asking my friends to take off their shoes at home, but I also didn't want them, you know, wearing shoes at home, because I think it's gross. But that's like one thing that I like had to ask my friends to do. But I was like, ooh, like it's just me, it's just my house, and so. But yeah, I feel like those little things happened so often when I was younger, but didn't really realize that they were because I was Asian. I also like didn't like learning Japanese when I was in middle school, because I'm like, why do I have to learn a whole new language when everybody else is hanging out with their friends? I'm like, why can't I just go hang out with them instead of like learning kanji, learning hiragana, you know? But now I'm appreciating, because, you know, I can call myself bilingual, because if I didn't do that, then, you know, I wouldn't be like where I am now. But yeah, I feel like, yeah. Ooh, another thing I just is like, whenever my mom calls me on the phone or my dad calls me on the phone when I'm hanging out with my friends, I like don't know what to say, because they're all staring at me, right? And I have to speak to them in Japanese, because that's all they understand. So I would like go to the corner of the room and talk to them, because I don't want them listening to, you know, what I'm saying, even though they can't understand what I'm saying. But it's just, I think that's the whole point, you know, like just speaking another language that nobody understands and just being uncomfortable. Having to like speak that in front of my friends on the phone.
Yeah. I still feel like that now. I'm like embarrassed. I'm like, let me just quietly speak Vietnamese to my parents. Like, it's gossiping. I'm like, they don't understand what I'm even saying. Oh god.
It sounds really suspicious.
Yeah.
Just like out of your way and they don't understand. Yeah.
Yeah, you could be saying anything to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't
That's
know.
a good thing.
You could. Yeah.
You can say literally anything.
You're like, I don't want to stay here. They all suck. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't say that.
Get me up now.
No.
I don't know. Like, yeah, I think mine's very similar to Asaki in that when I was younger, because both my parents speak English as well, and so I never thought that I never even considered discrimination as a thing for me. Like, I just thought I was one of everyone. I was one of, you know, the majority group. And so I never considered that even a possibility. And then, so it was actually more of a culture shock when I came back to Japan, and I found myself being really frustrated by this, like, this culture clash of people, because now people before, I guess I didn't look the part, but I played the part in terms of like my behaviors and my way of speaking. And then I came back to Japan and I look the part, but I don't behave like a standard or like societal expectation wise, like Japanese. And whether it's my speaking or speaking to elders or just the way I dress or whatever, and like people would point it out to me and also criticize me for it a little bit, and I got really frustrated at that. But then I don't know, it's but then I kind of started, I guess with maturity you also start to realize, okay, this is an aspect that I also need to respect because it's also me. And I started, like, the more I started to understand or like try and understand and try and respect it, and also like listen to them and like try and understand why things are like this in this culture, then like I really embraced it and I really like it now, and I really enjoy living in Japan now, much more than I did before. And I think it works the same for both, that I guess the struggle is always there, that you feel a little bit of an outsider wherever you are, that you somehow don't fit in completely. But at the same time, the positives is that if you try and look at it from like a positive view, then it's really that you're kind of able to switch between cultures, because you know both cultures. You're a lot more open about things, and you're a lot more, I wouldn't say necessarily knowledgeable, but you're open for that. You're open for, you know, to have conversations, to have difficult conversations as well. And you can also empathize a little bit better, I think, as well. And so in that sense, now at this moment in my life, I can feel that there's been more positives than there has been struggles. But yeah, I think back then maybe that I wouldn't have felt that way, but yeah.
I think like one thing about, you know, when you said about, you know, thinking about the positives about the Western and Eastern culture, which I've realized is being able to actually introduce my friends to these type of culture as well. And, you know, being able to approach it very, not, I won't say PC, but very appropriate, I guess. I think like, oh, you know, we celebrate Lunar New Year and this is what we do, X, Y, and Z, and then maybe introduce them to certain foods or certain like traditions that we do. And it's always appreciated as well. No one's really like, you know, oh, that's kind of weird or anything like that, you know,
exactly.
which is I've quite, which is interesting. Like you guys, I'm learning stuff from you guys as well about what Japanese people do. And like I remember on our last podcast, it's probably not out yet, but when I was talking about like dowries, you know, like that's weird. That was strange, but like even I felt like that was strange, and that was a culture shock for me. And that's my culture. And that was, and yeah, you just, I think it's an ongoing thing. Like I even learn about my own culture. It's an ongoing thing. I'm just constantly learning. And even like a Western culture, I'm still learning things like what we do here as well. So yeah, that's always quite nice. I think also just, you know, when people ask about, oh yeah, can you say this in your language? I'm like, so shy. It's like the whole thing about having a conversation with your mom on the phone. I'm like, I'm so embarrassed. Why am I embarrassed? They wouldn't understand. I could literally say anything and they think I was saying it correctly. Like all the time.
That's so interesting what you said though, because I absolutely agree with you. Is that, you know, not to say that people who don't speak up is not like, not to say that at all, but just I've realized that the more I feel comfortable doing things, talking about things, that people are actually not as mean as I imagine them to be. Like, you know, like if I say to my friends like, oh, is like, let's say my friends are coming over and I cook them like Japanese food, like the less ashamed I feel about it, it's not that big a deal. Like, you know,
if you're just proud about it.
And like I think before, obviously, like we were younger, so we wanted to kind of fit in, right? Anything strange was not a good thing. So you'd feel ashamed of being a little, you know, bringing rice balls to school, or like having, you know, not instead of sandwiches and stuff. But I realize now that, and I think when you're younger, people just are a little bit more kind of, they pick on you for like the smallest things. But now it's like, now I can, you know, it's a lot more like I feel a lot more confident to be able to say like, oh, this is my culture, like would you like, and give them the option of whether they want to experience it or not. And the more the more you kind of communicate in that way, you start to realize that, okay, these people, like maybe this person just isn't ready yet, or this person is like really up for it, and like and it just kind of it's a really, it like reflects kind of where I am and like my personal growth as well, our personal growth. That's why I like that's where,
because I remember like it's like an example, even like learning about your culture. I remember when you know we lived together for like what 2 years, and I remember like foods that you would eat was like, it's a similar ingredients, but we have it very different. I think so. Like I know you have different rice. You use like sushi rice. I have jasmine rice. We cook it the same though, not too much water, because it turns into porridge, which is a completely different dish. But I remember you having like rice balls. I remember you eat like tofu, very different to yours. Like you can eat it basically as it's served, kind of thing. Whereas I was like, oh my god, do you not need to cook that? I was like, it's cooked already. So we always have it like cooked
I
into
just had
food or
that
like fried.
realization a few days ago. I saw like a recipe of like somebody just cooking tofu, and that's not like a thing in like the Japanese culture. So I was
really?
like, they're cooking tofu.
Yeah, so when I saw it, I was like, I saw Satoko have it, I was like, are you not going to cook that? Kind of thing. But like I would never be like, what are you doing? I was just like, oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And I think that
like,
comes from our own experiences of people saying like, what are you doing? And feeling really like
knowing how
embarrassed
that makes other people feel.
and ashamed.
Touching on that, so I know we were talking about the positives on it, and I know with the whole COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affected, the Asian communities more on the negative sides. Because I know there was, an increase in hate crime pretty much all over the place, mostly in the Western societies, where there are communities of, Asian descent. And it is primarily actually these areas where hate crime has increased. I think primarily in California, which is dominantly Asian. So we can kind of talk about that. I know we've had this discussion before, and I know it is a hard conversation to have. And I know we did this on a live, just like almost crying, shaking. But yeah, we can talk about our discrimination, like maybe like as youths into our adult life as well. So in our personal or our professional life as well. And I know one thing which I realized was kind of like explicit and implicit racism that I've experienced and discrimination. So I think in a working life, it's more very like microaggressions kind of towards me. And I know they might not mean it in that way, but you have to really think about what you're saying and how it would affect a person before you even say these things. So I think one stereotype that I've really come across is they assume that I'm not British. So it's automatically I'm a foreigner. So I remember when I was starting my new job, a couple of months in, and that just small talk with just colleagues you don't really care about. Just, how's the weather? Blah, blah, blah. Just talk about the weather, waiting in the lift. And this colleague tells me like, you should be really used to this weather though, right? As in the hot weather. And I was like, huh? I literally was like, what? Excuse me? And it was like, back in wherever you're from, like it's hot, right? And I was like, I was born in the UK. And the person just went completely red. It's like, oh, okay. That explains why your English is so good. I was like, you just did a double whammy there, but okay. But like, I think it's my automatic reaction to just be like, I don't want to embarrass them further, but then you've just really embarrassed me. And I know that stereotype of Asians being quiet, I know that like sometimes I've been in those situations where I just don't say anything and I just regret it all the time. And like from AMP as well, I have grown more confidence in being able to actually speak out on these things. And I know with the the COVID situation, where it was suggested that it stemmed from the wet markets and the consumption of, I think, bat was in the conversation, and that's where it was stemmed from. And I had this direct colleague who sat next to me just saying like, oh, this is why we're having this pandemic, is because those people just always eat weird things. And I was like, that's very subjective of you to say. And I was like, you can't really say one type of person is eating weird food. Like foods that you might eat could be considered weird. So like British people, we eat, I can say we, I guess I'm British, right? We eat like black pudding, which is like, I think that's cow's blood or pig's blood. And like, that can be considered weird, right? Like the consumption of unconventional meats or vegetables or etc. can seem weird in other cultures, as opposed to yours. But anyways, I had this conversation and they was like, no, that's really weird. And I was like, loads of viruses come from meat that we even eat here. So, I was just discussing about, swine flu came from pigs, bird flu came from like, chickens, etc. These are normal meats that we would consider conventional meats, etc. And they just went silent. And the only thing that the person said was like, is swine flu from pigs? Is a swine pig? I was like, oh my God. that's when I realized I'm really having a conversation with a very, very ignorant person, and I'm just gonna stop that
It's a waste of
conversation.
time.
Yeah.
Exactly. And oh god. And then I had another experience. And when I was working at a Japanese bank, so I thought, oh, these people are chill, it's fine, it's fine. But the person wasn't Japanese anyways. But this person was like, you know, I don't think, young people or just people should really mix races when they date. I was like,
When
huh?
was this?
It's like
Really?
a couple of years ago. No, it was one of my old jobs, and
Oh my gosh.
she was saying how, and then I just like zoned out. I was like, I'm not really gonna engage in this conversation, and then she continued to say like, I wouldn't see you as an immigrant. I was like, I was born in the UK. I'm not an immigrant. My parents are immigrants.
Right. Yeah.
I am not. And all this stuff, and I got really upset actually, and I was like texting my other colleagues, they're like, please come into the room, and someone did come in, and that person was white Australian, right? And then I kind of like spoke to him about it. I was like, I'm an immigrant, why would she say that to me? And that's when I realized, again, as an Asian person, they will always see me as a foreigner. Without me even stating anything at all, they will still see me as a foreigner.
I'm really, really like thankfully, I've never, not to my knowledge, experienced any explicit forms of racism or discrimination, either like throughout school or in my workplace. I've not had anyone like actually come up to me and say like derogatory things. Even during COVID, I am in Japan, so I don't feel that direct kind of attack on, like there aren't any attacks on Asians because we're all Asians here, right? But what I have experienced before is like this, if I'm with a group of friends, and they start to kind of joke around and tease like, Asian culture, or like this whole, Asian women being fetishized, that kind of like conversation comes up, and I'm there, right? Like I'm sat there, but they don't see me as Asian, or maybe they do, but I don't know, but I'm there, and they're kind of like talking about it amongst themselves or like as a group, and I'm just there really uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, I'm Asian, is that how you guys see me, or like is that how I'm perceived by you? And then if I ask them, they'll be like, no, not you. And it's like, well, but what do you mean not me? It's like, I am Asian, and you're talking about Asian women, or like, stereotypes, and how can you then say that it's not me? How can you like how can you split those two things? We're not, it's not mutually exclusive. And so I've had that, and I've also had like, especially now during the pandemic, like on social media, some people, which, I wouldn't call them friends, but like people who I know, like repost or post things that are anti-Asian, or like say like the pandemic started from China, why aren't Asians holding themselves accountable and stuff like that. And you realize like, oh my goodness, even people who know me as Asian see other Asians like that. And then and that's that was a shock of like, oh, okay, so where do I fit in their like image and thought processes? And so like, I haven't had any of that kind of the experience that you've had, Lynn, where people actually come up to me and say things that directly, involve me. But I've been put in situations where I feel like, well, what do you want me to do? What do you expect me to do with that information that you just said about my race, about like people who look like me, but apparently isn't about me? And it's like, that just doesn't make any sense to me, right? Or I've also, but the one thing I have had is like people both in the West and also in Japan saying, oh, you're very outspoken. And it's like, okay, yeah, I am, because I say what I think and I correct people if I feel that they're wrong. But it's obviously stemming from an assumption that Asians aren't outspoken and that they're very quiet and they take everything. So a lot of times, like when I like in class or something, when I would just like put my hand up, or like I would kind of argue against something, people are surprised, and like, why are you surprised? Like, you're only surprised because of your own assumptions about
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
race,
I agree.
right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
in a way, like, you're just making your own, you're digging your own hole in a way, because you're just kind of showing how like you assume things. But so I think that's kind of something that's become a lot more prominent over the past couple of months, especially on social media, where I see people saying things that contradict how they behave towards me, or just like, yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that this pandemic has kind of really shown like a divide in a way of like who really was an ally, who really wasn't, and that's kind of a shame. And it would be nice to be able to kind of go back, like, educate each other in terms of like, that's not something that you should say, this is something that maybe would make other people like us feel more comfortable, and things like that. I think this whole year we've seen a lot of development in, especially when it comes to race. And so there is like a danger of making things even more divisive. But I think at least with ANP, we're being really careful in trying to be very like talking about difficult issues, but in a careful manner, in a way that is really built on kind of the foundation of communication and the foundation of basically what it means to be a human being, so that everyone can relate to it. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think that comes from our personal experiences as well that you've heard throughout. Yeah. What about you, Asaki?
I feel like for the past like I don't know, for the past at least like 6 years, I've been in this like little bubble, been protected in this like really nice group of people, because I went to school in Japan, so I didn't feel, I didn't look out of place. So it's not like I got discriminated because of my looks or how I acted. And I was surrounded by people who had similar backgrounds, like Satoko and Lynn, Asian, but had different backgrounds from Western cultures. And then I came back to America and I started working, but I work at a Japanese company. So I still fit in, physically, like how I look fits in perfectly with the rest of my employees. So I feel like I haven't felt any discrimination. But if I can go back to like my high school, I know that I've got a lot of, I think all these issues just all goes back to like really bad assumptions of like people making assumptions. I think it's just bad when, but it's just whenever they see me, just kind of like what Lynn said, whenever they see me, they don't assume I can speak English. So they try to, whenever I speak to them in English, they are really surprised that I can speak English. And they really want to know why, like where I learned English. I'm like, I was born in America and brought up in America. That's why I know English just like you. But yeah, I think those kind of assumptions. And also like growing up, I always felt like, or I've always had people asking me if I liked like Asian related things. So like anime or like sushi, like people always assume that I liked them, and they always like suggested like, oh, what about this? This. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't like anime, and I like sushi, but I'm not because I'm Asian and I eat it every weekend. They just like, I had this person, I don't remember who it was, but I remember being asked like what I'm having for sushi this weekend. And I'm like, do you assume that I have sushi every weekend? Like, is that a thing that you guys kind of made up in your, I don't know, but all these like little they just kind of assume. I feel like I said the word assume so many times. All these things on me. And I guess if I want to mention something, recent is I guess like at my workplace, they really expect my Japanese to be perfect, which is really difficult because it's really hard to, keep up both English and Japanese on a top-notch native level. And it's so, it's not like they, criticize me for anything bad, but I feel like Satoko and I, we talked about this, but they have really high expectation on Japanese, even though their English isn't as good.
Yeah.
You know?
Like a double standard. Like
Yeah.
their English, like a
Yeah,
double
like
standard.
That's really interesting, because when I was in Vietnam, they know I'm not from Vietnam, and they don't expect me to know any Vietnamese. So it's like almost they're surprised when I can speak fluent Vietnamese, and they're like, "Huh? Where did you even learn this?" It's like I speak to my parents in Vietnamese.
Yeah, and also like I've been working there for I think almost 3 years, so I guess my Japanese have improved, but people have told me like, "Oh, your Japanese getting better. Japanese is getting better." Like I feel it. It sounds a little condescending whenever they say it, because I'm like, I already, it's just like, I don't know, being bilingual at this, high level of bilingual is already hard enough. But like having that higher expectation from other people is difficult.
Yeah. I just remembered one episode. I don't know if this doesn't have anything to do with COVID, but it is like, microaggression / like low-key racism, low-key high-key racism. I remember one thing, and I think I don't like looking, how you look back and you're like, oh, maybe this was a turning point in my like self-development or like a thing. But I remember I still do really like history, and I remember in year 9 we had a really good history teacher. She was a really good teacher, but I don't know if she clearly had strong feelings about certain points in history. And I remember in year 9 we had to do this. Year 9's like what age? Just for Asaki.
Don't do this. We do this all the time. It's not.
It's like I think
I'm just gonna. I don't know.
School.
I don't know. I'm just gonna let it go.
I think it's like middle school. Like yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
And we had to do this project. We were like free to choose something in the, I think, during the Second World War or something, like that kind of period. And you had to like do a project. You had to like make a paper, like write a paper and like a poster and like decorate it and like explain it and then present it to the class. And I remember I talked about the atomic bombings in Hiroshima, and I was really proud of my work because I put in so much effort. I like researched a lot, and I thought I did it quite balanced, because I wasn't saying like it was anyone's fault. I was just saying that it happened, and however many casualties, blah blah, this was an atrocity, this led to non-proliferation, etc. And I was really proud of it. And everyone's like leaflet / brochure / poster thing was put on the wall except for mine. And I was like, why is mine not up there? And she was like, well, because basically because Japan lost the war and because Japan was not on the good side. And I was like, and it really confused me, because I was like, I wasn't talking about anything that Japan did. I didn't say that what Japan did was wrong. I was just pinpointing
Stating
a moment
facts.
in time that was quite close, that was quite personal to me as a Japanese person. And I just wanted my friends to know, or like wanted my classmates to kind of know what happened, because lo and behold, if you go to a British school and you do history, you're not going to learn about the atomic bombings. It's just not going to happen. So, and there was a lot of things that we didn't learn about that did happen. And I just wanted my friends to know about it because it marked a big moment in history for my country, and it didn't go up on the wall. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, and then like, I was like, okay, so these are things that I'm not allowed to talk about, clearly, because it like hits the nerve of some people. And yeah, it was quite upsetting, actually.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up because we're gonna rant on for a while. Our podcast calls, honestly, unedited, is around 2 to 3 hours. So if you love this conversation, reach out to our podcasts. We have them every month, like mid-month. So we have loads of different topics that you guys can get involved with as well. We're very excited to hear your comments as well, or any experiences that you could talk to us about as well. So some last words of encouragement is definitely, like, you're not alone. Any experiences that you feel like is weird or different, everyone, like, literally someone's experienced it. Like, that's what I've definitely realized with AMP as well, is every little thing that I think is weird, or like my parents, maybe it's my mom, maybe it's my dad, kind of thing, literally everyone else does it.
In addition to definitely have conversations, even if obviously when you're ready to have those conversations, but like Lynn said, everyone's experiencing the same thing. If you want to look at resources in terms of like platforms, then we use Instagram obviously for our main source of like easy access information, and I think profiles like Impact and like Dear Asian Youth and Next Shark always provide really good, like Next Shark and Dear Asian Youth provide good informations for what's happening in the Asian cultures, and Impact and intersectional environmentalists, and there are lots and lots of intersectional platforms and profiles on Instagram that you can also look up that have like really good bite-sized information, and yeah, different podcasts I think are also really useful. Some people have YouTubes, and I think the thing is that especially now, if you search something, you will always find it. And I think we talked about this in a podcast I think that will come up soon, is that whether it's like Asian makeup, like makeup for Asians, or like skincare for Asians, or like styling or haircuts, or like how to cut Asian hair. Like, we live in a world where if you feel any kind of discomfort or feel a little bit left out, you can always look it up and you will find something. And I think that's a nice thing. So I think in terms of resources, I would say those.
There's so many hardships and difficulties that we go through as multicultural, and just being westernized, not westernized, like Western upbringing Asians. But looking at the positives, I feel like being bilingual and multicultural, there's like a really good thing about it, is that you're just part of more culture and more group of people. So then there's more things that you belong to, if you look at it like that. Like, you can pick and choose what you like from this country, and then pick and choose what you don't like from this country, and then be like a better version of yourself, rather than just being or just belonging to just one culture or country. But yeah, I feel like throughout like AMP, at least for me, the more I talk about it and the more I explore about it, I've become more accepting of myself and my identity. So, maybe use these resources if you're struggling with your identity and stuff like that. Definitely talking to people who are in the similar background, and just discussing your experiences and just learning more about it would definitely help, because I know it did for me.
That's goodbye from London, Tokyo, and New York. Very different time zones. I'm ready to go to sleep, whereas Tokyo is ready to wake up.
Yep.
And Asaki's just having a party, I think, in the middle.
It's a Friday night.
It's Saturday now for me.
Oh my gosh.
I woke up at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much. And do tune in to our podcast and check us out at our
We'll
Instagram
be waiting for
at
you guys.
Asian Narrative Project.
Bye.